Welcome to 10 Seconds to Air. I'm Alita Guillen. Many of us use our phones to stay connected to what's happening with friends, family, and the world. It's become a staple in how we communicate with each other. We used it to stay up to date with COVID-19 and still use it to follow breaking news, politics, global conflicts. But how often do we grab that phone and check an email and end up somewhere else, clicking on a news headline or following an Instagram feed? Before we know it, we can be deep into unpleasant information and graphic videos. That's called doom scrolling. Many of us joke about doom scrolling, tease each other about being glued to the screen or unable to stop going deeper and deeper, clicking and clicking. My guest today is about to explain that research shows that doing this poses a serious threat to our minds and our bodies. Dr. Alison Holman is a professor of nursing and psychological science at the University of California, Irvine. She earned a BS in nursing, BA in psychology, and PhD in health psychology. She studies early trauma-related processes that help explain how psychological trauma affects subsequent mental and physical health. I know that may seem far from what you think is innocent doom scrolling, but it actually relates. She joins me now to talk about the dangers of doom scrolling and some advice on how to break this habit and reset our nervous system.
Stand by. We're going live. We're going live. 10, 9, going live. 7, 6, 5, going live. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Dr. Holman, thank you so much for joining me to talk about this very important subject that a lot of people kind of overlook or laugh at or think, so what? I'm on my phone a little bit longer. I found something interesting. I keep on going. Not the case. Quite serious for our minds and our bodies.
Yep. And thank you for addressing this topic in your podcast, because I think it's a very important issue that needs to be better covered in online and everywhere. People don't realize how much they're doing to themselves while they're doing that, and I think it's really important topic. So I appreciate your attention to it.
Well, and thank you for doing the research on it, which we're about to get into. So knowing that people don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about what it is that they're doing, how do you approach these conversations and teaching people about this? What goes through your mind? 10 seconds to air.
Ooh, well, I think one of the most important messages that goes through my mind when I think about this is to remember to focus on not just the damaging things that can happen, but the ways that we can protect ourselves. So to me, it's like reminder, the takeaway message. Remember the takeaway message. Make sure that you've got that clear in your head, because I don't want this to be something where people actually think, oh, doom scrolling, oh, the media, I'm doomed. Right? I don't want people to go to that place, because it is hard to give up sometimes.
Yeah. Where do you want them to go then?
I want them to go to a place where they can actually say, I can take control of this situation. I have agency here. I am able to do what I need to do to protect my mental health and my physical health. And I've got a toolkit. I've got things in my toolkit that I can use to make sure that I don't hurt myself. And in fact, oftentimes I think it would lead people to realize that they can actually regain control over their attention in a way that they may not have thought they could.
I think one of the biggest things that people, myself included, don't realize is the impact that it has on a kind of your everyday feeling, how you feel about just stuff. You know, you don't really attribute maybe feeling a little blue, down, a little anxious, all of those things. You don't really, you don't know where it comes from. You think the world is just not doing what it's supposed to be doing, and therefore I feel like this, but we're actually contributing to it in some way. And before you get to all of that, I want to say to people listening, don't go anywhere, because I don't want you to feel guilty, bad, shamed about whatever it is that you're doing. I want you to just know what it is. That's the point of the podcast. And then know that there are tools to help, and to just be willing to dive in and be transparent about what's actually happening. So let's go ahead. Can you define doom scrolling? Let's start there.
Okay. Well, basically, when I think of doom scrolling, what we're talking about is when a person gets engaged in, usually it's social media. I don't see people doom scrolling on television as much, but doom scrolling on social media, you start looking into, something that you're interested in. You might get a text from somebody that says, "Oh, you got to check this out." So you go in there, and it takes you into a place where all of a sudden the algorithms of the social media companies are taking you down and down and down another rabbit hole. You might click on something, they grab your attention, they grab your emotional attention, they really go after the emotion, and then they pull you in. And then as that happens, you go into more and more, like I said, rabbit holes. You go down these paths that become these paths you never intended to be on necessarily, but there you are. Right. And you're seeing stuff and experiencing stuff that you never really planned to look at, but there you are. And so it becomes this process where you get sucked in, and it absorbs your attention, and it catches you at an emotional level. And I think precisely because these algorithms are trained in such a way as to grab your emotion, oftentimes anger or outrage of some kind, or deep sadness, perhaps, oftentimes a negative emotion. Or maybe they're trying to make you laugh at somebody you could consider a rival, or somebody from the other side. So these kinds of things, people get caught up in them, and and our minds are taking in what is going on. They're acknowledging, your mind is absorbing this. Whether or not you consciously are aware of how it's doing that, it is doing that. And so, so that's what doom scrolling is, when you get caught up in that endless sort of rabbit hole of mess that the algorithms take you down in social media.
So you just mentioned a couple things that I'd love for you to dive into a little more. The emotional kind of takeover of your brain. What is happening chemically or emotionally that we don't even realize?
I can't speak to the chemical part because I don't study the chemical part, but I can say from what I understand and know about stress and its impact on our health and mental health, when we have those kinds of acute sort of emotional responses, it does create, you can create like a stress response in your body, but you can also, you can get your emotions aroused, and that just starts to feed into, and that's how come the social media companies do this, because you get pulled more and more into that deep emotional place, and it becomes harder and harder to pull yourself out because you've got so many emotions tied up in those, feeds that you're seeing. And they just become eye-catching. And that's the other thing, is they become very eye-catching. That's actually how I got into doing this work in the first place, because I go to the gym, and when I go to the gym, they have the bank of TVs in front of me. And when they're going over a negative event that happened in the community, a bad event that happened in the community where somebody got hurt or whatever, the way the media actually shows this is they take the same images, the most eye-catching images, and they create a reel of those images. So while the talking head is telling you the story, this reel of stuff is going by your face. Your eyes are seeing the same thing over and over until the story's over. And I kept wondering while that was happening, I was going, what is that doing to my brain? What am I experiencing here? And there is some research to suggest that when you see videos that you could experience as potentially traumatizing, that it actually does trigger a response in the part of the brain that is associated with post-traumatic stress symptoms. So, we do see that there is an activation in the parts of the brain that are associated with negative mental health outcomes when you see traumatizing video. And if you see it over and over and over, we don't know for sure because we haven't gotten that far in our work, but is that repeated exposure over and over in the media actually like reinforcing and reinforcing and reinforcing? And certainly if you look at our research, our studies do show that people's emotional responses, when they tell us how they're feeling in our surveys, their emotional responses are strong and persistent when they're exposed to these kinds of images. And the more graphic the image is, the more likely they are to, they have a higher response, a stronger stress response to those images.
Well, speak to that for a second. What are the exact responses that are happening? What is happening to our body and to our mind when we're repeatedly seeing these graphic videos?
Well, the graphic images that are put forward are actually stimulating in our minds that sense of horror that you see. I mean, when you see, for example, in a war situation, when you see images of like bloodied bodies or bloody situations, that actually can that triggers that sense of like aversion and horror. I mean, human beings don't like to see that stuff in general, and so we see that, and that actually creates that sense of discomfort and stress in our bodies and in our minds. And that's why we see in our studies, we've seen in our 9/11 study, we saw that images of dead Iraqi children and of military personnel, dead military personnel, that was really hard for people to see. People don't like to see dead people. People don't like to see bloodied images. People don't like to look at war up front. But when you see it up front and close, like we did actually during some of the Ukraine war, some of the images that were coming onto the media during the early phases of the Ukraine war were showing things what's the word I want, as they were happening.
Yeah, in real time, live.
Live, yeah, exactly. Thank you. Live as they were occurring, and it was horrifying to see that, to know that a human being is experiencing that. So human beings don't like to see that.
Yeah.
And we experience stress symptoms. And so what we show in our studies is that these images do, graphic images do increase the risk or increase the likelihood that a person will experience acute stress, what are called acute stress symptoms, which are basically early post-traumatic stress symptomatology.
Which present in what? In what kind of, in depression, in anxiety? I even read in some of your studies cardiovascular issues.
Right. So what it would present as is you would see it as, for example, a person might experience intrusive thoughts about the images that they saw. They might not be able to get the images out of their minds, or they might feel like they have to strongly avoid situations that might remind them of that, or they might feel what's called hyperarousal, where they're kind of on edge because those images are there in their head and they're just making them arousing them. And you can imagine when you get really aroused physiologically, that can actually have implications for your physical health.
Yeah. There's two sides to this, because there are also some images that are important to see, right? I mean, there are some things that we do need to see in order to make change. I think of George Floyd. Had that not been captured and we had not seen that, as disturbing as it is, that was an important moment that we see. So how do we balance that, or what do you find in, how we respond to that type of a thing where we do need to see some of these images?
It's a fantastic question. And it's really, really important, because I don't want people to think that anything I'm advocating for is to put your head in the sand, because that
Right.
isn't what I'm advocating for. People do need to know what's going on in the world around them. The challenge is what do you see and how much do you see? So, I don't encourage people I don't encourage people to show or to engage in the repeated self-exposure to graphic images, because we have seen in our work consistently that those graphic images, and we define graphic images by images of dead bodies or bloodied people or bloodied places, that it's obvious that somebody had been seriously hurt. Those kinds of images consistently in our work only seem to be associated with distress, with post-traumatic stress symptoms, etc. But when you look at some images, there are some images, and we're starting to look at this, and we have some work that we've done where we're trying to see, well, are there images that you can see in the media that actually might, for example, might they encourage people to do things to help people? So we're trying to understand that distinction, and it's looking like there might be. And I can't go into detail about all of this because we're still in process about it.
Yeah.
But it is the case that there are images that people can see that won't necessarily cause the distress or lead to distress, but rather could, in fact, perhaps maybe do something positive in the world. So that's an empirical question we're working on right now. And, fingers crossed, we'll be able to address that question pretty soon.
Yeah. It reminds me of, I'm going to go back a little bit because times have really changed since we've had social media. Because I know you're saying media, and media is kind of covering a lot of bases right now.
Yeah.
I was a TV journalist. I was a reporter in Miami during 9/11.
Yeah.
And I remember specifically us not choosing the media outlets at the time, which were your top 4 broadcast stations, and then some of the cable stations. We decided not to show the planes going into the World Trade Center. We chose not to show people jumping out of the building. There was a moment in time, maybe it lasted for a few days, where we were showing those images, and then we chose not to show those images. Fast forward now, Charlie Kirk, when I heard that he had passed, I opened my phone, and on social media immediately popped up his killing.
Yeah.
And I was shocked that I got that without even looking for that. I didn't ask to see that.
Right.
That is something I cannot unsee.
Yep. And that's a huge problem. And that's what the social media, the new media landscape that we have entered into in the last 20 years, that's what that has brought us. It has brought us to a place where you sometimes cannot stop somebody who may have popped a picture onto Facebook or onto Instagram or TikTok or wherever, popped the picture on there, the image, the video, and it opens up automatically. So what people need to know about that is that you do have some control on your phones to stop things from automatically starting. You can actually say, no, I don't want any automatic starts.
Go into that. Don't
ask me how. I don't ask me details on how to do that, because
but you can.
I'm not a big tech person. I would have to ask somebody to help me do it. And I've just taken all social media off my phone. I mean, I just don't have social media. So I just decided.
Well, that's really hard. That's a really hard choice. And good for you. I have 2 children who have decided to not use Instagram anymore. I'm shocked. I kind of check in with them once in a while to say, do you still not have it? And there is part of me that is concerned that they're left out of some things. On the others, because it's a social connection for them with their friends.
Right.
The other part of me says, wow, that's great. Are we turning a corner here? Are young people deciding that they don't like what is happening or how it's making them feel? Now, both of those kids said, I didn't like how it was making me feel. One of them said, I wanted to try and see if I was feeling bad because of it. And the other one said, I just want to do an experiment. And while we're traveling, I'm not going to look at it at all because I want to be present. So they both started in different places. Fast forward a few months later, they are both choosing not to go back to it. I find that interesting. I wonder if there's a movement there. I don't know.
Well, it was my children, my adult children in their 20s, who told me, Mom, get that stuff off your phone. And I'm the one that does the research. So figure that one out.
Yeah. Okay.
But it is important, and it's wonderful that your children are that self-aware that they're paying attention to what's going on inside their minds and their bodies, to know that they don't feel good, to be that aware. I think a lot of times people just get into it and they go so far down the rabbit holes that they
Yeah.
actually stop at some level. They're not really aware of how it's impacting them. But then when we ask them questions about it, they may realize, oh God, I am having these intrusive thoughts, and oh, I do want to avoid that now, and oh, I am feeling aroused and having all these other symptoms. And ultimately, it heightens people. It can heighten people's anxieties, and over the long term, it can have very detrimental impact. I mean, you had mentioned earlier, if I may,
Yes.
you had mentioned earlier some of my work on cardiovascular
Yes.
disease. And while I didn't look directly in that study at the impact of media, at how whether media itself was directly associated with cardiovascular disease, in my 9/11 study, what we showed that the acute stress that, and this was, okay, so let me back up a second. In this study, we had a nationally representative sample of Americans. What that means is it was people from all over the country, right? The vast majority of people in our study were from anywhere but New York City. Okay. They were from California. They were from Texas. They were from, Oklahoma. They were from all over the country. In that study, we looked at the acute stress that they experienced in the immediate aftermath of 9/11. So that was measured like 9 to 23 days after 9/11. So it was pretty quick. It was within the acute stress period. And we looked at the levels of acute stress that people reported experiencing. Now, how did they experience acute stress when they weren't at the site of the towers going down?
Right.
The vast majority, it was like 90 something percent of the sample was anywhere else. And yet many people experienced high levels of acute stress. And that acute stress that they experienced was associated with new onset cardiovascular ailments 2 and 3 years down the road.
Wow.
New onset,
Wow.
because in that study, we had already, the survey research company had already measured mental health and physical health in the population of the sample that we used. So we had pre 9/11 physical and mental health. And we said, okay, did that physical or mental health change over time? And we saw that there was an increase in cardiovascular ailments reported. Now, this is them telling us that a doctor had diagnosed them with these ailments. But nonetheless, these were people who were not at the site. They were actually witnessing this in the media. That's the only way they could have seen it. They could have seen it live in the media because somebody told them before the second plane hit, go get your television on, you got to see this. Or they could have seen it after the fact. But they the vast majority of our sample only saw it in the media. And yet we saw that their acute stress was associated with new onset cardiovascular ailments. We then saw that the media exposure that they had, then this was all just looking at television, how many hours of television they watched in the week following the attacks. The number of hours of television they watched in the week following the attacks was associated with other new onset physical ailments as well, 3 years later, and increases in post-traumatic stress symptoms 3 years later. So we're seeing this in that study, and we've replicated those findings after the Boston Marathon bombing in relation to other studies and in COVID. And we're looking at, now we're looking at we're in the process of getting some papers done on how COVID and all of the many, many, many collective stressors that have been experienced over the last 5 years, how those are associated with physical health. That's something we're actually working on now.
So I'm really wondering, in all that you're bringing all of this together, there are all these really big life events that have happened. And you can look back now, 9/11, more than 20 years ago. I'm wondering about, and stay with me for a minute on this.
Yeah.
I'm wondering about COVID-19 and those people that experienced or didn't experience some pretty crucial life events and now are, and there's a lot to this question maybe, and now they are part of that generation that is getting their information from social media. So for example, we've got the kids that didn't get a graduation, then didn't get a prom, then didn't get a freshman year in college, and now they are subject to getting information that maybe they don't want. They are stuck in this sort of social media doom scrolling. There's a real feeling in the world for that generation that feels like it's hard to get a job, it's hard to buy a home. It's sort of this compounding feeling of doom. And I just wonder, I'm throwing that all out to you to say, what research is happening around all of that now? You said you're doing some COVID-19 research. What are you hoping to pull out?
So we are looking at exactly that. We are looking at, and trust me, as I mentioned, I have young adult children, and I'm very worried about the younger generations. I'm very worried about them. I like seeing when they say they're not going to continue, getting into social media and doing the doom scrolling. I love seeing that. But I am very worried about younger people. So in our study, we are looking at exactly what you described, which is what we call compounding and cascading stress and trauma at the collective level. So when we describe that, compounding is when things happen like right on top of each other. So you've got, you could have, we were in the pandemic, and the pandemic started, there were multiple murders of Black citizens at the hands of either vigilantes or police. There was a horrible climate summer in 2020. I mean, fires burning everywhere. It was George Floyd's murder. There was a very contentious election happening, and all that stuff just was happening at the same time and then cascading on each other. So the election came as a cascading event after a lot of that stuff, right? So it was COVID and the deaths, and then George Floyd, and then the summer.
It doesn't end. It feels like it doesn't end.
It feels like it doesn't end. So we call that cascading and compounding collective trauma. And so we've been measuring that in our study. We have a study that we started in March of 2020, and we've been following people ever since. And we have, I think it's 2 more waves of data to collect on the sample. And we are, looking at, how much stress are you experiencing from these various events that have felt like things that were just happening on top of each other and cascading events. So mass shootings in the state, in the country, we've had lots of mass shootings. You had Uvalde, you had the mass shooter in Buffalo. We have major political polarization in the country that is actually one of the things that people say is one of the greatest worries and stressors that people are reporting now at the collective level. And so we're monitoring this, and we're looking at how are these cascading stressors and compounding stressors associated with the mental health and physical health over time. That's in process. So I don't have specific reports to give you.
Yeah.
But I can tell you that from just some preliminary stuff that we do see that there are some mental health correlates of high levels of stress. So when people are very stressed, report experiencing a lot of exposure and stress related to that, they are engaged in media more, and they are also experiencing more psychological distress.
So what do? Do you test like how many hours of exposure they have, or how can you test that?
Well, we do with the media, we do how many hours of exposure they have to a variety of media sources. Okay. That's how we study the amount of media. And then we have a whole set of questions we ask about what kinds of images did you see in the media that we that we develop based on what's been in the media. So our questions are highly relevant to what's actually in the media at the time that we're surveying people. And then we have a measure that we borrowed from the American Psychological Association, which basically asks people, to what degree are you experiencing stress regarding all of these various events? And so they tell you on like a 5-point scale, like how much stress they experience on a from political polarization, the overturn of Roe versus Wade, the mass shootings, the climate change related stuff, the war in Ukraine, et cetera, et cetera. And so we have a very long list of items, and we ask people to tell us the amount of that, how stressful they experience those things to be.
And then how can you compare it? Then do you take it away and then test their stress again, or do you find another group of people who don't have that exposure and ask them the same questions about their stress level?
We don't have a second group. No, we look at within person change over time. So we look at the same people over time, and we watch how much are they how much is that stress associated with these downstream symptoms that they may be having. And then in subsequent stuff, we can we do the statistical testing. It's boring, but you can do statistical testing to look at.
Very important, though.
In addition to, yeah, right. In addition to the amount of your prior stress in being associated with these outcomes, how is the current stress associated with those things? Does that make sense?
Yes. Okay, so can you then make a change if you're feeling stress or post-traumatic stress? Can you make a change to your exposure and then dial it back and rid yourself of some of these anxiety, stress, cardiovascular, maybe not, I don't know, I guess it depends on how far you go, but can you change the feelings that you have, the depression that you might feel, the anxiousness?
I believe yes, you can, and people can actually engage when people will often tell you that. I mean, you mentioned that your child even experiences this. When you dial it back, when you start pulling away from the exposures in the media, you can very well you're exposing your body and your mind to less of the stress, right? So you're going to have a lesser response, and ultimately that can produce fewer symptoms of distress and, post-traumatic stress and depression or anxiety type symptoms. And so that's why I encourage people to do that. And I encourage people and this is the other thing I really, really encourage people to please, while you're engaging with social media, do body scans, pay attention to what's going on in your body, take deep breaths to make sure that you're not just shutting yourself off from that connection. Because oftentimes when we're stressed, we start having, we'll start breathing more shallowly, our heart might start beating fast, our stomach might start churning, our shoulders might start creeping up. These are things that we have to pay attention to and use our breath and use our common sense to pull ourselves away and to just shut it down for some time and just take a few deep breaths, and you'll see those things start to abate. They start to go away and you start feeling better.
Is there a point at which you become desensitized, and that sounds negative, but at a certain point, is that actually a positive to not be so sensitive? Somebody may say, well, it's fine to just be able to look at something and maybe not have those feelings, or is that not human nature?
Yeah. That's a really, really good question, and it's one we've tried to address in our work a lot. Our work suggests that people get sensitized, not desensitized.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Our work suggests, and we've shown this in some papers, where when people engaged with a lot of media exposure to the Boston Marathon bombing, and they experienced more post-traumatic stress symptoms months and months later, they reported to us even later down the road, that they were more worried about future terrorism. So they were worried. So a lot of people, as they engage in the media, they develop these post-traumatic stress symptoms. They become more worried about the future events happening. And guess what they do after the next event?
What?
They go to the media. They go to the media. They become more distressed. And it becomes this vicious cycle of media exposure, distress symptoms, worry about the future, more media exposure, more distress, more worry about it. Becomes a negative cycle for people. And so that's why again, I come back to the place of really monitoring what is going on in my body.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pay attention to what's going
happening
on in your mind and your body, and try to turn it off.
Yeah. So let's get to that. I'm going to tell you what I've done recently, and I don't know if it's right or wrong. I think I read an article that you participated in, and maybe I made a change after that, and that's how I found you. But I noticed that I'm trying to control. Here's what's happening. I personally am trying to control what I take in. So I'm trying to make it, not necessarily control it. I'm just trying to reset it and make sure whatever I'm taking in is my choice, as opposed to it becoming something that chooses me. So what I found was happening, and maybe for people listening, you have the same experience, but what I found is that on my phone, I had alerts set up for things that I thought I was interested in. So like news events, texting, something that has happened, breaking news. I mean, I'm a news person, right? I like to follow what's going on.
Right.
I used to have the TV on 24-hour news, and just kind of had it on in the background. I stopped doing that a long time ago. That doesn't exist. But when it came to my phone, I was allowing these alerts to come through because I thought it was breaking news. The problem is breaking news happens non-stop. So I could be in the middle of talking to you, or as soon as we're done, and my phone has all these alerts that I have missed in this last hour, and I will go because, hey, those are really attractive clickbaits that they put up there, and I got to click on it to see what just happened. And I would find that I would go deeper and deeper into that. So I have taken all the alerts off because I thought maybe that will help me, and I'll have to go search for it. So that's an adjustment that I have made, but I would love to hear from a professional what you suggest we can do to kind of reset our nervous system.
That is exactly what I would recommend people do.
Okay, good. I'm off to a good start.
You're off to a very, very good start, my friend.
Okay.
That is precisely what I encourage people to do, because basically when you allow those alerts, it's kind of like letting somebody poke you.
Yes, completely.
Right?
And
So
I was so agitated.
And
I was so irritated, and I couldn't do anything about it.
Exactly. And the problem is that because of the way the social media landscape works, they don't have filtered pokes. It's not like they're poking you with something that's gentle. It's not like a gentle thing. It could be, as you experienced, the Charlie Kirk murder on video.
Yeah, that was awful. Yeah,
which is
an
awful.
awful experience.
Which is awful. And I can tell you, like, there is a situation that occurred. I don't know if you remember the Charlie Hebdo attacks in Paris on the magazine, where there was a group of terrorists who attacked the Charlie Hebdo magazine headquarters. And there was a man who was actually lived right nearby where it happened, and he heard some commotion outside his window, and he went up and he videotaped a policeman being killed by the terrorists outside the Charlie Hebdo building. And he popped it onto Facebook. And within a very, very short period of time, it got into the French news on television. And the brother of the policeman who was murdered heard his brother begging for his life. Please don't kill me, before he was shot. And he witnessed his brother being murdered after begging for his life. How do you think that made that brother feel?
Yeah.
That guy lives with tremendous stress and post-traumatic stress symptomatology.
Yeah.
I pray for him. I pray that he got some care that has helped him deal with it. But that kind of thing can happen. And that's because it's unfiltered, right?
Yeah.
It's unfiltered. People are not making those decisions carefully to, oh, well, maybe this might hurt people. So because social media in particular happens to be very unfiltered, it's really important to turn off the alerts so that you can't be poked.
Right.
Don't let them poke you. That's number one. Number two is the other stuff I was talking about. It's like really, really trying to be aware within my body. And I mean, I use a lot of things. So I encourage people to pick a couple of sources for their media. Like, what are the media sources that you find to be most reliable with facts? And the way you do that is you do fact checking. So I encourage people to not only find reliable media sources, but also fact check them, because even the most reliable media source could get it wrong sometimes, right? So fact check what you're seeing. That takes another step, puts another step in the way of you becoming emotionally responsive to it, right? I'm going to wait, hold on. I'm going to check this out. This kind of looks a little fishy. I'm going to check it out. So you check it out. If it's true, then you can ask yourself the question, well, how do I want to respond to this? Or do I want to respond to this? Right. And so I think giving yourself a series of things and then limiting how much time you spend. Like, I don't spend all day scrolling on my, going to the media. I do listen to the media. I do pay attention to the media, mostly listen on podcasts and stories on the news, but only like for maybe an hour a day. And I split it up in the morning and the evening. So in the morning I get a dose, and in the evening I get a dose, but not in the middle of the day. I got work. I got other things I got to do. So dosing it, making sure that and then when you're dosing it, different people are going to have different amounts that will work for them. So what might work for me might not work for you, right? And I think people need to understand there is no one size fits all resolution to this. People have to pay attention to their bodies. That is why I come back to that all the time.
Yeah.
Breathing is such an important, it's actually life-giving. We have to breathe, and we have to pay attention to how does our body feel when we're breathing. When we take a really deep breath, how does our body feel? Because that will help us understand if there's something else going on.
Yeah.
And then you monitor that. And when you start realizing that you're starting to have some feelings in your body or in your head, if you're starting to feel like, gosh, this is really awful, shut it down.
Yeah.
Just turn it off. And I really encourage people, honestly, I'll be frank. I don't think social media is the place to go for news.
Yeah.
You're not going to get factual news.
For sure. Yeah.
You're not going to get factual news. You can go there for play, but if there's some news story, it's suspect. If it's on social media, there's suspect. You need to start by questioning it, but then also find other sources for news.
Right. Right. I think it goes back to the two pieces that I hear you say over and over again is to do the body scan and to choose and choose what goes in. But two things. One, do the body scan, see how you feel. And number two is really think about how much you're absorbing that you didn't choose. So have a time of day that you go in to check and have an amount of time that works for you. Or maybe it's once a week that you go in and that's good enough for you to catch up.
Right.
But have an idea of what works for you. Find it.
And that's the important thing, is really understanding. I'm a nurse, right? My first training was as a nurse. And I can tell you, I know from my experience as a nurse and also from my experience in life, there, as I said before, there is no one size fits all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? People are different because people have different life experiences. We all have had different life trajectories. Different things have happened to us in our lives that have affected who we are today. Those things are going to affect what works for you in response to the media. And I think really trusting, if you do the body scans, and if you really give yourself the time to just sit and reflect. I'm a big fan
Yeah.
of reflection. I think reflecting on like okay, let me think about that. What did I just see? And how did that make me feel?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what do I want to do with this? And do I want to let myself feel that way because
Right.
of that?
Right. Right.
Maybe not. And so
Yeah.
really making it a deliberative, engaged, reflective process where we remain in our minds and bodies at the whole time, so that while we're doing this, we can have that control over what happens to us. And I really encourage people to do that.
Yeah. I mean, also in saying that, I think we have to recognize that we may not like everything that we see.
Mm-hmm.
Some things are important to see. I mean,
Yep.
I can't imagine that, you had the Vietnam War and you were like, oh, that doesn't make me feel good. I'm not gonna watch that.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, in this day and age, because we would have seen things that we definitely shouldn't have seen, but you need to be informed.
Right.
So I don't want to suggest that you ignore things that don't make you feel good and then you're not informed. I think
Right.
what you're specifically talking about are the images that are disturbing, graphic images that aren't necessary to maybe understanding what's happening, because that's very different, right?
Yes, it is very different. And I'm
Yeah.
hoping that we will be able to share at some point in the near future, like, are there images that actually are good,
Yeah.
that we can
Right.
start sharing, that we should focus on sharing because they have a different impact? Or I shouldn't be so strong. I can't, we don't do experiments. So we haven't done this as an experiment. So I can't say that it has an impact, but is associated with better outcomes. So
Yeah.
we want to be able to test that. And we are trying to test that. And so it's really important to remember that. The other thing I want to mention, if I may.
Yes. I was just about to ask you, is there anything else that you want to mention that we haven't talked about? So now's
Yes,
the time.
please.
There you go.
Yes, please. One of the things that's really, really important in life, and I teach about this in my school, staying connected with other people. This is another strategy that people can use around news. You can actually try to engage with news with other people who you know and trust well, who you feel comfortable with, who you're able to, you're able to stay grounded and connected to another person. A lot of times we do this stuff alone. And the isolation of going into social media alone, that isolation
point.
that creates is horrible for us. And so trying to spread it and making sure that we actually are engaging with other people in like physical contact, if possible, within your home, if possible, or with friends, or however you choose to do it, however it works for you. But to make sure that you stay connected to the people in your life that matter to you, and that you are able to talk to them and share with them what your experience is. And honestly, also being compassionate, really coming to them when you sense that somebody else may be experiencing distress. Show compassion for them, engage them with, help them, try to not get sucked into a rabbit hole. Be a pro-social person. Go out there and do things to try to help other people too. That in itself will help you manage your own stress and your own experiences better.
Good note. Very good advice. So when do you think this study from the COVID-19 and the cascading events will come out?
Oh, we have a habit of publishing papers for a very long time after the study. Hopefully in the next year or so. It's hard to say for sure. Hopefully the next year and a half, we'll be able to get some stuff out about that.
Okay, good.
But there is, there's a timeline that happens with getting papers published. You got to submit them, you got to address reviewers, etc., which is a really good process. It's important that happen, that our work be vetted by others. So.
Well, we look forward to reading that.
Yeah.
Dr. Alison Holman, thank you so much. This is such an important conversation to have and for people to consider. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to share this with you. It's great.